Hello, everyone at Lyon Con. How are you?
Whoa, yeah.
Guys, welcome to the very first Lyon Con here at LT. We are Caffeinated Comics. We are, I'm going to say it now, we are the official LaGrange comic book podcast.
Until we hear otherwise.
We've been running for 5 years now. This is obviously our first time at Lyon Con, because this is anyone's first time at Lyon Con. I'm the host, John Clark, and with me, as always, is the co-owner of Caffeinated Comics and my co-host,
Stephen Brown.
And Joe Pakovitz is here, who is a frequent guest and our comic book historian.
Hello, hello.
So, we were talking about this convention, which is going along fantastically. We have our coffee from Initiative Coffee Company, so thank you guys for that. There is no beer here because it's 1 in the afternoon, so hit up Initiative Coffee Company. But as we were talking about this being the first one, I started to think about just an overall collection and an overall fandom. What is it that gets you started on something? Because as I was getting ready for this convention, I got a little nervous. I was thinking, what's it going to be like? Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Am I going to get along with people? Are people going to like me? And there's a little voice in my head that goes, well, then don't go.
Right.
And I realized that that's the voice in my head that argues with me all the time. When somebody says, hey, why aren't you reading Saga? Why aren't you reading Y the Last Man? Why aren't you watching Game of Thrones or Doctor Who? And it's that little voice in my head that goes, but I don't know if it's going to be good. I only have so much time in a week, and you know what? I know that Batman's going to be pretty good. I know that I know it was easier for me to start Star Trek Discovery than it was for me to start. Trying to think of what I haven't started yet. Supergirl. I've never seen an episode of Supergirl.
Yeah.
Because I always feel like my time, the way I budget my time, I'll go with the safe bet rather than go with something that might be more exciting. And now, Stephen, I know that you tend to follow creative teams more than you tend to follow franchises. And Joe, you tend to kind of try everything.
Right.
So what I'm wondering is, what is it that gets you past the safe and the familiar, and what is it that gets you into trying something new?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to comics, it's certainly, it's definitely creators. For the most part, I'll read anything that creators I enjoy are writing, so it's weird. It's like I don't have even, like, people ask, well, what's your favorite character? And it's like, well, Thor's great right now, but 5 years ago, before Jason Aaron was writing it, it was terrible. Mm-hmm. You know, but then 5 years before that, when Straczynski was on it, or maybe that was 7 or 8 years ago, it was awesome. So I think for me, when it's a matter of starting comics, it's a combination of who are the creative teams on the comics writing the book, and are all the right people recommending it? Because a lot of times you get recommendations constantly, especially if you're in a comic book store a lot, and it's impossible to read everything. But you get to kind of feel out who really kind of knows what they're talking about, customers, other employees, friends, and you hear the same thing coming from a bunch of different people who don't know each other, and it's usually a pretty good bet that it's going to be pretty good. That's a great
point. That's a recommendation I always do, is are they coming from different sources? Because I got into Doctor Who when it started streaming on Netflix, so I was a little late. Like, Matt Smith was already there. But the reason I got in was because, not because so many people were recommending it, but like Joe was recommending it, but people I knew from like living in New York 10 years ago were recommending it. And I'm like, these people have no connection other than this thing that they both like. So it's probably pretty good. Now, Joe, what gets you starting something new?
It's basically a couple things that you've already hit on. First of all, a lack of time to do everything. You can't pick everything. The other thing is I want something that's new and novel. You know, we're seeking this experience of being alive and learning new things. And if somebody can show me something that I haven't seen before that's not derivative, or if somebody can show me that they've perfected something, then I want to take a chance on that.
That's interesting. Yeah, because, like I said, I agree with you that there's only so much time in the day, but that's kind of why I don't try new things sometimes. Because if I go into a store, there's only so much money, but even with even with things that are free, like trying a new TV show, or honestly, you can find a lot on the internet for free. If I see a Batman comic that I haven't been enjoying for like a year or two, and I see a creator-owned comic that I don't know anything about, I'll always buy the mediocre familiar comic.
Yeah, and for me, it's the up and down thing that Stephen alluded to earlier. There's always a cycle. So as soon as one thing stops being interesting, I'm going to drop it, and I'm going to look for something that I find interesting. And if that something is new, then I'm going to take a chance on that, at least for a little while.
Yeah, it's like with Tom King in particular.
Yeah.
He's writing Batman and Mr. Miracle.
Right.
But
and
I'm
he had
reading
just
Mr.
finished
Miracle, but
Vision.
not Batman. And
So
it's,
you're not reading his, I thought you started his
No,
Batman.
I only read a couple issues because Mann is the last name of the artist.
Clay Mann.
Clay Mann was drawing it, and it's beautiful. So it's not always a writer you really like that will get you to write or read a book, you know. And a lot of it does come down to the amount of material that's out there and the amount of material that's being produced. You know, it's like I really love the first season of The Flash, but there's 45 episodes,
Yeah.
and I can't watch. I don't have time to
There's
watch
45 episodes, and they cross over into 4 other shows that each
that I'm
have
not
45
watching.
episodes.
And I've heard like Legends of Tomorrow. I think you were watching that for a while. No, somebody was telling me that like Legends of Tomorrow is an awesome show, but it's like I don't have the time to watch it, you know, because then I know I've got to watch Arrow and I've got to watch Supergirl.
Right, and that was the thing, because they just announced that Constantine will be on Legends of Tomorrow, and I loved Constantine for all of the 13 episodes they made.
that we got.
And it's like, oh, another episode of Constantine in the middle of the show with 7 guys I don't know. Does that mean I now have to watch 40 more episodes of something that I might not like to understand what's going on when Constantine walks into the door?
And I think that kind of goes into some jumping on and jumping off points, because there are properties that have those easy places where you can pick it up if you haven't been following it, and there are some things where you have to go all the way to the back. That will also inform my decision as well.
Right. Yeah, I have that with, I'll have these digital collections back when Marvel used to put out DVDs of, like, say, Avengers 1 to 500. I started reading Captain America, and I was like, let me find the good runs. And there was, I wanted to find the run that Mike Zeck did, which has never been reprinted, but it's on the DVD. Or Grunwald had that long run, like the Nomad run in the 70s. But every time I try to find the start of that run, it's always kind of picking up the plot from the last issue. So I never quite, when you have everything, it's so much harder to find a jump-in point, which is why I appreciate trades, because even if it's an arbitrary number, a trade will tell me, you start here. So it's less intimidating to jump in. But Stephen, I want to get back to something you said about how you'll follow a creative team from book to book. In a way, that's still going with the safe bet. You're not going with the safe character, but you're going with the safe name.
Yeah.
So how do you try somebody like, say, Tom King, who's a fairly new writer? Vision, which was a year ago, was the first major book he wrote.
With him in particular, it was the Vision. I'm a big Avengers fan, so I mean, I was reading like the Hercules miniseries they put out at the same time that was okay, but it wasn't as good. And it was as soon as I read him on Vision, and then they announced he was going to take over Batman, and then he was going to do Mr. Miracle. Mr. Miracle's one of those characters where I'll try anything they try with Mr. Miracle.
Yeah.
And it won't always be great, but when it's great, it's phenomenal. So it's kind of hit or miss. But I do think it's it seems weird, and maybe we have to ask like a younger person than me, but like
there are younger people in this room than me.
This room is lousy with younger people.
Yeah. You are a younger person than me.
Yes.
So almost everyone.
But I feel like with comics in particular, I just kind of started reading. Like, I don't know when I stumbled into a comic book store as a youth, but I want to say I just started reading comics. Like, I didn't worry about the story. It was like the Beetle was framing Spider-Man for murder with like a gun that shot webs.
That is a terrible story.
But
that story is called Web of Life. It's a limited series, and you should not read it.
But the Beetle, he's great.
Oh, the Beetle is great. Not here.
No, he's terrible.
I was working in a comic store when that came out, and I believe I said to myself, this is the first Spider-Man comic I won't buy.
Wow. And I bought it. Yeah, I don't know. So I feel like there's people all the time at the store, they'll ask, like, well, what's a good jumping on point, or, like, what's a good place to get into the comics? And I don't know if my answer of, well, pick a character you really like and start reading it, if that's, like, a good enough answer anymore.
Right.
You know, a lot of times it seems like there's so many new series starting, and there's so many #1s and relaunches. DC's doing this great thing where they put the story arc on the title and, like, a banner at the top, and it'll be like part 1, part 2, part 3.
And they're
I
much
feel
better about making that part 1 a real part 1 rather than we just wrapped up the last story, but here's some lingering threads
Right.
like they used to do up until the 2000s.
Yeah. Well, it's weird with that Beetle comic in particular. I remember being, like, very confused when I was
'Cause
reading it.
it's not
No,
good.
No, not only because it was probably rubbish, but because, like, it was probably, like, the 3rd or 4th part of the series.
Yeah.
And I just thought, like, I don't know, I was like an idiot or something. Like, I was like, I'll figure it out later. And I never did. So far as I know, Spider-Man's still framed for murder.
So what is new beginnings always involve a risk? So what is the risk outside of maybe a little bit of lost time?
Yeah, lost time and losing out on something you might enjoy more. It's actually also the reason I'm a picky eater. Because as much as I know, like, I should be eating better than I do, if you give me the choice between a cheeseburger and a salad, that cheeseburger gets my money.
Yeah.
And I know I should eat the salad, and I know the salad might be better, but there's a much lesser chance that that salad, which is going to be better for me in the long run, is going to taste better than the burger. Because a bad burger beats a good salad. And I feel that way about characters. And as I go back to my characters, honestly, my favorite superhero characters predate my reading comic books. Because my favorite superhero is Batman, which I would see reruns of Adam West, and I would see reruns of Super Friends when I was too young to read. And Spider-Man, and I would watch the Spider-Man animated series. You know, both the 60s and Amazing Friends. And the Electric Company. So I knew who these characters... And my first comic books were Indiana Jones and Star Wars. So I had come from other media to comics. So when I started to get into superhero comics, I went, well, then what is Spider-Man doing? If Marvel publishes Star Wars and Indiana Jones and I like those, okay, they publish Spider-Man, so I'll read Spider-Man. But it was all of my friends who were recommending the X-Men, who I had never heard of. There were enough people recommending the X-Men that I also tried X-Men.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point because anybody who was born in the 60s or afterwards, you were probably introduced to your favorite comic book characters not through comic books themselves, but through TV in some form or another. Either it was the animated Spider-Man or Batman 66.
Yeah, those original
or
Marvel
anything
ones
like
where they
that.
cut Jack Kirby comics and like move the arms around.
Has the internet changed the way maybe people are introduced to things?
Well, I think more of them are introduced by movies now.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's like it was cartoons in the 90s when I started reading, but now it's all movies. You know?
Right.
It's like Black Panther comes out in like a week and a half.
Yep.
And it's like, if you asked me when I was a kid if they were going to make a Black Panther comic, or a movie, I would have been like, no way.
I don't know
it'll never happen.
I don't know if Black Panther was ever in a cartoon before Earth's Mightiest Heroes.
You know, he was in the 90s X-Men cartoon.
like in a tree?
Yeah, he's like in a tree. The camera like pans across Africa, and he like climbs up a tree, and you're just like, whoa, who was that?
That was before X-Men had sold the licenses to various companies.
Yeah.
So Spider-Man would just show up in X-Men and run away.
Yeah, it was a weird show.
Yeah.
A lot of screaming, running, and jumping, but
A lot of Canadian
that's
accents.
how the 90s comics were.
Speaking of Black Panther, that might be a good segue into the current controversy regarding the movie itself and the campaign to lower its ratings in Rotten Tomatoes.
Right. Well, that's a thing about when I started thinking about staying with stuff. We are such creatures of loyalty, especially in collectors, where we stay on a thing and stay on a thing and stay in a thing. Danny, who's helping with the show today and who's been on our podcast before, told me when it came in that the most popular section of this convention right now are the gamers, and I'm looking at a lot of gamers right now. If you're playing a game, chances are you're not learning it today.
Right.
Like you've stuck with that game for a while, so it breeds this kind of loyalty, and there's that Marvel versus DC rivalry, which has always been there, which that fantastic book Slugfest by Reed Tucker is all about. So, but the movies are building up that rivalry again, where there are internet trolls who are trying to lower the score of Black Panther before it comes out because they don't want to accept that Justice League wasn't very good.
Right.
However, picking Black Panther makes it look like you have a completely different agenda than just being a DC fan.
Right. It's not like these guys decided to pick on Thor Ragnarok.
No, they want to make DC great again. Let's put it that way. So is there a point where your loyalties, as I was starting at the show, there's a time where my loyalty to, say, a character like Batman will keep me from buying Saga because my $3 will go to something that I'm used to. Where is the point where that holds you back? There's a difference between never reading Y: The Last Man and trying to convince people that Marvel makes bad movies because because the movies that you want to be good aren't good.
Justice League sucked.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's very few books I'll read and I'll stick with out of loyalty. Even books that, like, I think, like, Avengers is a good example. I really like it. It's, like, my favorite book. But when it's really bad and it's not great right now, it's like I'll drop, like, 4 out of the 5 titles they're putting out. And it's just, like, I'll flip through one maybe. And I don't know. I think it's, like, there is a hope that it'll return and get better, or it'll be more like what you want it to be, or
right.
how you think it should be. But I think a lot of times, you're just kind of left waiting for a good arc, to come along. When Jeff Loeb finished up on Batman, and Azzarello, I think, took over after Hush.
Oh, yeah, after Hush.
I was like, I like Batman. I don't know, it must be me. And then 7 issues later, I was like, no, this is a trash story. And then I gave up reading Batman for the next 5 years.
No, I stayed.
Because I also think
I was not rewarded.
No, but I think there's I don't know if it's like a level of delusion maybe of just like hoping it'll get good or waiting it out until it turns itself around.
And well, they always do eventually. So it's like, do you want to? It's how much do you want to sit through, versus how big a hole do you want in your long box?
Right, and that's part of the fan experience. The fan experience is about appreciation of something, but it's also about hope for that it will continue to be what you want it to be in the future. And that's any kind of fandom. Fandom of a band, for example, is the next album going to be good? Fandom of a sports team, are they finally going to stop sucking? Will next season be better? Fandom of comics.
Yeah, you've just gone through that over the last few years.
I've been gone through that with the Chicago Fire soccer team.
Oh, that reminds me. This is almost a sidebar, but a friend of mine I work with got a call from the Chicago Fire yesterday asking how many tickets he wants for this season. He went to 1 game last year. So that's how much they need people in the seats at Chicago
That's
Fire.
like Zack Snyder calling you up and saying, so you going to come to the next Justice League?
How many people are you bringing to Man of Steel? You bought John Byrne's Superman, right?
You still watch Doctor Who, and you're a longtime Doctor Who watcher, Joe?
Yes.
Yeah. And how often is Doctor Who not great?
I would say, well, these days it's at a pretty high hit rate. The last season was not great.
No.
And anytime, okay, I'm going to take this from a different angle. Like, how bad does it have to get before you jump off? In the early 90s, with all the crossovers and the aluminum covers and the 2-page spread art with no story, eventually I got to the point where I just didn't like superhero comics as a whole anymore, Marvel or DC. At that point, I discovered the black and white independent scene, things like Cerebus, comic books like that, and I made a completely different switch into a whole new area of comics other than superheroes, simply because I couldn't stand the way the whole industry had gone.
So whereas my loyalties lie with a character most of the time, Steven's loyalties lie with the creative team, your loyalties lie with the medium, where it's
much.
like it doesn't have to be superheroes at all, but you want to be reading comics.
Yes, because you get that comics have a unique pacing and a unique ability to show you things and to let you ruminate on them in a way that a moving picture, either on TV or movies, does not. You can backtrack and watch the same scene now that we have VHS and DVD and Blu-rays, but it's not the same as really looking at a page continuously that does not move.
Right. And that comes out every month forever.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing that comics have over books are like movies where maybe you'll get a series, but they're usually one-off. Television shows these days have an endpoint.
Right.
You know, so you can get, as you said, 45 episodes
Yeah.
of Flash every month, which is how you feel about it.
Yeah.
But you know there at some point it's going to go off the air. Like Grant Gustin is not going to be the Flash when you're 62, or when he is, for that matter.
Maybe not. We'll see. Yeah.
The only way you have to worry about that in comic books is if you like a B or a C-list character. Like if you're a Doctor Strange fan or a She-Hulk fan, no, you're not going to have a continuous run all the time.
Right. But it's like what you say before about Mr. Miracle, Steven. It's characters like that, when they come back, which is like once every 10 years, it's usually because the person doing it really loves that character and really has a great idea. Because Mr. Miracle in particular, because there was, like, I can think of very few runs. There's, the Geffen DeMatteis run in Justice League International, which is phenomenal. But, like, Steve Rude did a couple of books, and Steve Rude, like, loves Jack Kirby, and those are great. And Kevin Dooley wrote a series for a little while. Like, John Byrne did The Fourth World around 2000. There were certain characters that are a cult even to their creators, where it's like the passion is always going to be there because the person doing that really wants to do that. They're not using it as a stepping stone to get onto Justice League.
Right, yeah. Tom King, I guess, he's got like the best gig in comics would be like writing the monthly Batman. So Mr. Miracle is definitely like a pet project, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great book, but there's no way it's selling anywhere near what Batman's selling.
And he was already writing Batman, so it's not like
Right.
he pitched Mr. Miracle and then got on Batman.
Right.
He was already there, and he was like, who else I'd really like to do?
Yeah.
This character you don't think will sell.
Yeah, and it's not like everyone, even guys I like, will peter out eventually. You can, writers can overstay their welcome on books, Bendis, and,
Well, I hate to switch gears that quickly, but Bendis announced just 2 days ago that he's going to be writing both Superman titles.
Right.
Now, how do you feel about that? Because it's a complete 180 for him. Do you think that's a fresh start?
Yeah, it's he's writing a character he's never written before, and I like when Bendis starts a book, and I like maybe if he only does 5 years on a book instead of 10 years on a book, and if he's got a good idea and it's a good story, I'll run with it. But you'll know pretty soon whether or not it's worth sticking it out, on a book because he's going to be doing two. It's Action and Superman, and I think that's, again, a commitment because it's like how many...
I imagine they'll just cross over every issue. I don't think he's
Right.
going to run two separate threads. I think it's
Right.
just he's doing Superman as a twice monthly.
Which is insane because it's like when he was doing two Iron Man books, it was really two books where nothing happened in.
Oh, it was terrible.
Instead of one book where nothing happened in. But like that.
It was $8 a month to see nothing.
Yeah, but it sure looked pretty. Yeah, I think like Nick Spencer's a good example of a guy I really liked. I kind of followed him from book to book at Marvel, and then he just kind of like lost his mind
On Captain America?
Yeah, well, the Hydra Cap stuff was interesting, but then Secret Empire was just like a dumpster fire. So it's like, I don't know when the exit point would have been, when he should have got off that book, or maybe editors made it into a bigger event than it should have been. But you also run that risk of these. It's like I'd rather a writer and artist get out of the book, and I want more of it, other than them staying on too long and kind of like ruining it,
Yeah, because it reminds me of the X-Files is back now, and the X-Files was a show that stayed on too long. The last couple of seasons
overstayed
are
its welcome.
unwatchable. The second movie is unwatchable. But when it came back, I was there immediately, and they did 6 episodes in that first season back. 2 were phenomenal, 2 were okay, 2 were garbage. and then they took another 2 years off, and they've come back, and there have been 4 episodes. 1 has been phenomenal, 2 have been okay, and 1 has been garbage. And it's at the point where I was watching the last episode, which was an okay one, and I'm like, I'm ready for this to end.
Yeah. Speaking of garbage TV, John, you still hate watching Gotham?
No, because they're not putting it on right now.
Oh.
But when it comes back, it's going to be an interesting dilemma for me.
And you're going to be watching it, though, right?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about that.
But you hate it.
X-Files this season is being shot in New York, which is the first time they've done it. They did the original series in Toronto, then they moved it to L.A., and then this season's in New York for some reason. So they've been doing all these locations that kind of feel like Gotham. And there was a moment I was watching this week's episode of X-Files, and they were like in some hospital or something, and they went down a staircase, and I'm like, that looks like something they would shoot on Gotham. Oh no, Gotham's coming back! And it was just this like dread descended on me. I quit Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., I quit Flash, I never watched Inhumans. I tried Arrow for like 5 episodes. I can't quit Gotham because it's Batman. And it's terrible.
Now, one of the things about comics writing is we talk about the A, the B, and the C plots. Have you ever picked up a book because of a B or a C plot where you didn't like the A plot?
I picked up a book because of a B character. So not necessarily of their plot. Like when I first started reading X-Men, Nightcrawler was my favorite.
Ah, okay.
So whatever plot he was involved in, which was always a B or C plot, basically, I was invested in there. But there's never been. It's not like I picked up Spider-Man going, what's Robbie Robertson gonna do?
Where's the Rhino?
Oh my God, the Bugle's in financial trouble. I need to buy next month's issue. You know, the A plot revolves around the A character.
Yeah.
If you're not invested in the A character, even in a team book, it's not going to keep you.
So, John, I know you're a Iron Man fan, so I assume you'll be reading.
I'm very excited for Dan Slott to be writing Iron Man.
Joe, I know you.
But I'm not leaving Spider-Man because Nick Spencer is.
I don't know if that's confirmed, but it's a rumor mill.
But whoever's going to be writing it, I'll at least buy the first few issues.
Yeah.
And that's another question I have for. If you're not that devoted to a character, how long do you give something new before you decide that you're staying with it or that you're leaving it?
I know the
do
answer
issue
to this.
1? Do you come back for issue 2 if you're iffy on it?
Yeah, so I always, a good rule of thumb for me is you get your stack of like weekly comics, and then the second, you're reading them, and then, it's in a stack. And the second I hold a comic and it's a new issue and I sigh,
Yes.
I'm done with the comic. It took a while to get to that point, like, in my, whatever you call it, reading history, but as soon as I'm like, it feels like a chore to read Spider-Man, I'm done with Spider-Man.
I was like that with my DVR, which I'm trying to get off cable so I don't have a DVR anymore. But I learned that with when Clone Wars was on. I was somewhere in season 3 and I saw there was a new episode in my DVR and it just felt like work.
Yeah.
It was like, all right, 20 minutes. It was like getting on a treadmill. Right. It was like, well, I know I have to watch Star Wars. And then a voice went in my head and went, no, you don't.
Yeah.
That's also the voice that says I don't have to get on a treadmill.
Do you ever, I try to never, I always want to finish a thing,
Yes.
But it's maybe a little more difficult when it's like a TV show or like a long run on a comic, right? You can't ever finish Batman.
Well, you'll never finish a comic
Right.
because somebody else will come on and that character will continue.
But recently,
unless it gets canceled.
And I wanted to watch, I like Godzilla as like a very casual fan.
Okay.
And they did the new anime on Netflix. And I was like, oh, it looks awesome. It's like Godzilla and he's like enormous. And it's in the future and the whole planet got like taken over by monsters. And I was really excited. And I saw the trailer and all this good stuff. And then I went to watch it and it was so bad I turned it off.
Yeah.
But it's like...
That's how I felt about Terminator Genesis.
Yeah, see, so it's like there is things where it's like, I have no qualms about shutting a movie off and just being like, I'm done with you.
Yeah.
For me, there's a difference between properties that are, or writers or arcs that are plot-driven versus character-driven. As long as you can keep the character interesting, I'm much more likely to stick with it. But if it becomes totally plot-driven, and if I'm not invested in that plot or what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
I can jump off much more easily.
Yeah, that's how Star Trek lost me. Was Voyager was very, very plot-driven, and I just didn't care about any of those people. Like, leave them in the Delta Quadrant. I don't care.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, I
let
just-
them starve to death in the Delta Quadrant.
I stayed on Claremont's X-Men way too long after I
So
should
did
have
Claremont.
bailed.
But I also have, it takes me a long time to get into something, because with television series, I usually don't get into it till season 2. And then if it's streaming on Netflix, I'll catch up. I was just thinking about Breaking Bad is celebrating its 10-year anniversary. And it's the 10 year of the premiere. It ran for like 6-7 years, so it's not like it's been gone that long. But I remember seeing ads for it, and it was a premise that I thought was interesting. It was Bryan Cranston, who I had liked in Malcolm in the Middle and Seinfeld and The X-Files, and it was created by my favorite writer of The X-Files. And it still took me to like season 3 to start, because I just didn't know if it was going to be worth the ride. And I had read enough reviews, and I had heard enough, and I started it before Netflix started streaming it. I was having them send me the discs. Within the 3rd episode, I'm like, this is the greatest show I've ever seen, and thank God it stayed that way.
And
It never dipped in quality, but it still took me a long time to start something that I knew was going to be good and was better than I thought it was going to be. But I still wasted 2 years before I started it.
Yeah, the flip side of that is I will tend to dive into things on the first episode and see if they get good, and the problem with that is you get shows like Next Generation or Babylon 5, where that first season is just a hot mess. But the second season is when they finally figure it out and start killing.
Yeah, well, Star Trek was one of those shows that I was there for the first episode, and I was gone by the 10th because it was so bad.
Yeah.
And it was literally like Spock had to show up to get me to come back to Star Trek The Next Generation. And then I was like, oh, the people that he's talking to are pretty good at this. And then I started watching, and then I watched everything after that. So there's like, it's almost like there's a turnstile for me to get into something. Once I'm in there, it takes me a long time to leave. But it takes me a while to get into it.
Yeah, I don't have my finger on the pulse like culturally. So like Breaking Bad and like Game of Thrones were already like these huge seasons of like shows that everyone was like raving about. There were like 3 or 4 seasons in before I got to them, and I actually kind of like it that way, because then it's like, all right, it's really good, so you hear from a bunch of people that it's really good, but it's like my heart can't take it if I really like a show and then they cancel it.
Oh,
And
God.
they never
resolve the plot thread?
I can't do that. It's like, don't play with my emotions like that, television.
Right.
You know?
Firefly.
Well, yeah, that's
Yeah.
like the big one everyone
Firefly,
talks
they
about,
did
right?
come back and make that movie.
Right.
And that's when I saw Firefly. When that movie was in theaters, then I started Firefly.
Yeah.
And I didn't start Buffy until I had watched Firefly 3 times.
But yeah, I do think there's something to that where it's like I don't want to start a thing until I know it's gonna stick around, and then I hear from select people that it's like a good thing to get into, because there is so much. I mean, there's like what, 18 shows right now, live action shows based on comic books between.
And it's not even that, just things that people recommend. Because between network, then cable, then streaming. I mean, there's as much on streaming as there is on all of cable.
Yeah.
So no one can watch everything. I hear that from TV reviewers now. They're like, I can't watch all of it, and it's their job to watch all of it. There's just too much. So word of mouth is the most important thing. It's between word of mouth and, like I said, a pre-approved property. Because I'm going to see the next Marvel movie. You know, I
Yeah.
might not see the next comedy until I hear that it's worth watching.
Right.
But because the brand recognition is there and because they have that track record, Black Panther is going to be good. And the reason it's going to be good is the last 14 movies that Marvel made
Yeah.
were good.
It's like
It's like Pixar before Cars 2.
Right, yeah. Well, do you think, and I have this with comics, not really too much with like TVs or movies, because I figure like there's less of that. But with comics in particular, I feel like Previews comes out every month,
Yeah.
and every month I'm like feverishly flipping through previews to be like, I don't want to miss anything. And like, thank God, Danny's at the shop in LaGrange, and if I miss something, we have very similar tastes.
Yeah.
So she usually orders a thing I miss, and I'm like, oh, this is amazing. This is like my new favorite book. And she's like, yeah, I tried it out. It looked good. And it's like, well, thank God, because I missed it. And I feel like there's a bit of like, I don't know if it's like a control thing or what it is, but like this worry of like missing out on awesome stuff with whether it's comics or movies or TV, because there's so much of it. It's like, it's hard to know. And I think it's tricky when Marvel and DC are easy. They are always hiring guys you've heard of, right? So it's like...
Well, they wait for them to prove themselves before they put them on one of their properties.
It's the indie books that freak me out. Because
Yes.
it's like, all right, here's a book by a guy you've never heard of, and it looks interesting, but it might suck. But in case it doesn't, it's going to be awesome, and you're going to miss out.
Right, and the danger with most indie books is a lot of them are done by guys who aren't good enough to be at Marvel or DC yet. So it's like, okay, this is a guy early in his career, and maybe he'll be good, but he's not as good as this guy that's working at Marvel and DC because he's put in the years. Right. And he's got to the level where Marvel and DC has noticed that guy. The guy who self-published his own first book, you never know.
Yeah, and the other thing about that is that they're also following their own vision. They're not taking over somebody else's property and trying to use it. Mm-hmm. So you don't know if they're original creative instincts are well. Like some people can write the hell out of an already established character. It's almost like fan fiction.
Right.
Really good fan fiction. But some people are really good at creating things, but they can't sustain them.
Yeah, because every established character has walls around it. And a lot of creators find that frustrating. But for a reader, they're not just walls, they're guardrails. Right. So you can't go completely off the deep end. No one is going to make Batman a heroin addict. You know, right. Because there's certain things you cannot do with that character because so much relies on that character. So there's places you can't take that character, which can be frustrating, but it's also protective.
Like Robert Kirkman, Walking Dead and Invincible was great. Creator-owned stuff, his own little universe. And this, I haven't read either one of those books in a while, not out of like personal, but like I lost track of them. But they were great when they started. They were phenomenal books. I don't know where they are now, but Marvel was like, oh, we'll get Kirkman to come over and do some Ultimate X-Men.
Right.
And I was like, oh, cool, I like Kirkman. Let's see what he does with the X-Men. And it was like, I don't remember exactly what happened in those comics. I just remember them being some of the worst X-Men comics I ever read. You know what I mean?
You did a short run on Captain America that was also just as not good.
And I think to Joe's point, it's like some guys can come up with really good stories and they're doing their own characters and whatever, but then, you put them on established characters with 75 years of history, and they can't do it, Well,
maybe that's one of the reasons that superheroes are traditionally a young kid's game. Not only does it appeal to young kids, but I feel like they're the ones that have the time. When I was a kid, I didn't have the money for every comic, so the comics I bought, I read over and over and over again and got immersed in it. Now, I speed through stuff on the train going to work, and then I work all day, and maybe I finish it on the train coming home, and I don't think about it again. Yeah. So I just don't have the time in my life to get as deep into the mythology as I used to do. So it's like I just kind of want that little bit of reminder of what it's like to be that age. But I have just such a small window to have that experience.
Right, because you're not doing it full time. If you're doing it full time...
Well, and also I'm not in school where I get out at 3.
Right.
And I have a summer off.
Yeah, what I don't get is how the creators, like people like Mark Waid and Dan Slott, who obviously did their homework. They know these characters backwards, forwards, inside out. They know 50 years worth of comic book history, not only of the characters they're writing about, but of the general universe. They're obviously older, they're not the kids anymore, but that knowledge really does inform their writing, and it makes it better, I think.
Right. Well, you're also talking about guys that have been in the business for over 20 years.
Right.
So this has been their job. So they're not who we are. They're not stopping their comics to work an 8-hour day and starting their comics. The comics is their 8-hour day. if not 12 hours, if not 24/7.
And-
So they have the amount of time I had when I was 13, because they don't have the responsibility of a different job that pulls them away.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like Kurt Busiek and Mark Waid have done panels before of like where you gotta like stump them with like
Yes.
obscure comic facts, and it's like I don't know that it's been done yet. Between the two of them, they have like an encyclopedic knowledge of this stuff, and I just wonder is like, all right, initially that comes as fans, and then maybe they got into the industry young enough to where they can sustain that or keep it going, or they don't dip in their knowledge. But it's like the stuff some of these guys reference, you're just like, it's like it's unbelievable. Yeah.
We've talked about beginnings from a consumer point of view. How about from the creator point of view? We're kind of drifting into that. And Stephen, you've got a book coming out right now. When you were writing, how much reference? What was the beginning of that like?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even start with me. Carm's over here somewhere running a Chimera's booth with Danny, and he had written a comic. And I think and John, you've written comics before, but everyone has stories they want to tell, and I think a lot of people, like this convention, it starts with an idea, and then it takes something else to give it that little push. And, it's a lot like when we started the store. It was essentially like ignorance. We didn't know what we couldn't do, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I think with comics in particular, of starting a comic or writing a story, it's at some point it moves beyond just like fan fiction or like a hobby, and it gets to a point where it's like you really want to give it that extra push to see it either published or sell it to somebody if it's an idea or however it works. And
I think the drive in something like this industry is that it's a small industry. It's not as big as Hollywood, or it's not so intimidating that you feel like I can't be part of it. But it's also so important to the people that are into it at such an age that it really makes an impact. That if you're the kind of fan like we are that never lets go, that doesn't move on, you feel like there's got to be a reason that I've been with this so long, and part of that reason is I have something to give back to it. It's almost like I almost felt like writing comics was the validation for reading so many comics, like that I wasn't just a passenger in this, that I had a part to play as well, whether it's creating your own comics or taking a character and taking them on your journey. It's kind of that feeling of, well, not only is it connected to me, but now I'm connected to it.
yeah, I think it's like there is a level of wanting to participate in your own fandom or whatever. And I think with conventions in particular, it's a good way to do it. At least it's you're one step closer to that world. It's comics is like you're reading them in your bedroom or wherever on the train, and it's like, all right, well, at least when you're in a convention, you're in the same room with the people. And then if you self-publish a comics, you've put in the work that it takes to make a comic, or you know what I mean? It's like there is some level of like participation, and it's kind of like comics aren't like they used to be anymore. The guys working in comics are fans of comics now. Jack Kirby and John Buscema didn't care about comic books. They wanted to be architects, and they couldn't,
And that's the interesting dichotomy about the comic book industry was it's a copycat industry from the beginning. It was started by guys that couldn't do comic strips in newspapers.
Yeah.
And then every fad was somebody jumping on somebody else's success. The reason we have Marvel superheroes is because Robert Goodman heard the Justice League was selling. So it's based on, if you like this, you'll like this. Just stay here and we'll give you more of this. But then on the other side of that spectrum, you have these indie creators, and we have a whole hallway here today of people that are saying, but I have a new idea, I have something new that I want to get out. In this industry that's based on doing the same thing over and over and over again, you have a lot of people that are like, but here's something new. Now, Stephen, you're on the precipice of publishing your own comic. what is your strategy to get people interested in something new in an industry that's based on Batman again, Spider-Man again, Superman again? How do you get people as excited about your book as you are?
Yeah, we actually had I don't know, it's probably not unique, but this strategy was open up a comic book store and sell the comic to people that are coming to your comic book store.
So the idea was a comic book store that had one comic in it.
Yeah, real long-winded plan.
It's like, did you see those pop-up stores where the guys rebuilt video stores with nothing but Jerry Maguire in it?
Oh, no.
They built a pop-up store. They found every unsold VHS of Jerry Maguire and filled the store with that.
Yeah.
That is your plan for the Magnificent.
Yeah, I mean,
just floor to ceiling.
I'm not the idea guy, you know. That's Carm's department. I'm the guy that sits and draws, and I let smarter people than me kind of figure out how to get other people to read it. But I think it's something where, you know, we know what inspired it, and we would ideally push it to people who like the same stuff we do. Because I think ultimately most creators in comics, or like Tom King or guys who are writing Doctor Who or whatever, they're fans of the material that they're writing, you know? And I think it's, you know, every creator that I've met or I've talked to, people just want to create things that they want to enjoy. And I feel like if you're creating something, you're trying to make money, or you're trying to make a big splash, you're gonna fail. And I'm just an idiot. I don't know what I'm talking about. But I do feel like if you want to make awesome stuff, it has to be stuff that you yourself would want to read or watch or enjoy. And I think it's that's, to me, that always ends up being the stuff that really kind of excels. You know, I read an interview Brian K. Vaughan did about Saga, about creating it. And he said when he was a kid, he really liked Star Wars. And as many kids do, he drew drawings, he created characters, and he basically tried to build like his own kind of Star Wars world. And when he pitched Saga at Image, a lot of the goofier characters, like guys with like televisions for heads, are based on drawings he did when he was a kid that Fiona Staples, the artist on the book, then cleaned up and made look really beautiful. And it's that kind of idea of like, it's like innocent naiveness, you know, to think that you can create a thing, or that the thing you want to create is something that other people might enjoy, I think.
Right. Yeah, and that's the whole trick is there's a million superheroes.
Right.
What is it about my superhero that's going to resonate with other people?
I mean, the same thing.
And that's the whole industry.
Right, and the same thing's true even with this podcast, right? It's there's millions of podcasts. It's insane. And I've said it before, and it's something where it's like I just want to do a show that as long as it's entertaining for me. I think maybe that's at the end of the day. I just am trying to entertain myself. And as long as I'm entertained, I'll keep doing the thing. And if other people find it entertaining, that's like icing on the cake. You know?
Well, this whole podcast is really geared towards entertaining you.
Yeah,
because
100%.
You walk into the studio and the microphones are set up, and espresso has been made, and the software is up to date, and I'm stressed out about 5 things that you are not.
Right.
and then we finish recording, and I click stop, and you say goodbye, everybody, and you walk out the door. That sounds so entertaining to me.
Yeah, it's a fun thing for me to do. And you're gracious enough to let me.
Well, what is, you know what, we're coming up at 3 o'clock. There's another panel coming in at 3 o'clock. I think we certainly don't want to get in the way of the rest of the day. There's a lot happening here at Lyon Con, and I think it's going to be a great day. So I just wanted to add with this one question. What is the thing that it took you way too long to get into, or that you still haven't gotten into? And what's the reason behind not doing it?
You want to go first? The thing I haven't gotten into that people always yell at me about is Doctor Who, and I've tried like 5 times to start watching Doctor Who, and it's really hard. I can't get into it, and it has everything I like, I like space and time travel and grumpy old men with superpowers, and the whole premise is amazing.
What is the barrier?
Um,
Is it continuity? Is it Britishness? Is it
yeah,
the plotting? Is it?
I don't know. I think it's even like the episode. I've handpicked episodes that sounded exceptionally good to get into, and I just think there's some kind of barrier that I'm not either understanding or I'm just like, I don't get it. And it's a personal flaw. Yes, I don't know, cause like Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad or any other show I've watched that I've really enjoyed is all the right people like this show. Right. So it's like the exception of the rule of like, this is the show everyone recommends that I just cannot for the life of me wrap my head around to either understand why everyone else likes it or care enough about it to pursue watching every episode or sticking with it,
What do you think it would take to kind of crack that open for you?
Yeah, I thought the girl that played Clara was that. I thought, like, this is the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. I thought for sure I'd watch this show when she was on. And then they changed the doctor to a grumpy, angry old guy.
Yeah.
And I love grumpy, angry old guys. And I still, and I still couldn't get
You're
into
between two of them.
Yeah. And I still couldn't do it. So it might be an unattainable thing for me. It might just be the thing I never get into. But I'll make an effort every 2 years.
For me, it's Game of Thrones or other fantasy-based properties that are not Lord of the Rings. I have tried to watch individual movies that are sword and sorcery and dragons and stuff like that. I've tried to read comic books, read printed books like novels and things like that, and I just can't get past Lord of the Rings because I think that was, to me, that's the avatar and the pinnacle of that kind of writing. It's the most complete world because he spent all of his life, decades, building it, and whenever I try to get into something like that, I just say, well, Tolkien wouldn't have done it like that, or he did this better or that better. Even if I like individual characters or intriguing plot points, eventually I just kind of fall off.
Maybe there's some kind of like danger to something being so good in the genre that it like spoils the rest of it for you.
Well, sometimes you just get fed up with people recommending it.
Yeah,
sometimes
and
you're just like, I don't want to hear about Game of Thrones anymore. I know personally I have a problem with any property that takes itself too seriously. And outside of Tolkien, I don't see a lot of humor in a lot of the fantasy and sword and sorcery. Like things like Conan and Game of Thrones and like a lot of those early 80s movies when I was the right age, like Dragon Slayer and the Sword and the Sorcerer and the Dark Crystal. They're all so wrapped up in their own mythology that it doesn't give me a way into it.
And that's a good point. The closest I've gotten is Robert Asprin's Hit or Myth series that is overtly satirical. Like satire of the genre I can get into.
Right.
But serious examples of it. And I think that's kind of what Stephen was alluding to have something be an avatar of something, especially when it's the first thing that comes out of its type, or the first thing that hits it big of that type, and it's already so well executed. Like, how does anybody crack that?
Yeah. I was gonna say the same thing because I dropped Game of Thrones after the first season because I just found it cruel, and it didn't have a lot of hope in it, and it didn't give me reasons to want to live in that world. But the more I think about it, sometimes you just need the perfect jumping on point. And one of my favorite properties ever, I've already mentioned on the show, it took me 5 years to get into, and that was The X-Files. All of my friends were into it. It hit all the criteria we've talked about. People that didn't know each other were recommending it. One of the artists I was working with at the time said, it's a writer's show that you should totally be watching it. And I would try it, and I couldn't get it, and I couldn't get it, and I couldn't get it. And then the movie came out, and all my friends went, so I went to the movie just to hang out with my friends. And it was the perfect jumping on point at that point. They were like, here's Mulder, here's Scully, they're looking for aliens, they can't find aliens, here's the tone of it, here's the atmosphere of it. And at the end of that movie, I was like, oh, I love it. And then I watched every rerun I could, and now it's, it's almost 20 years after that movie. This year is the 20th anniversary of the movie. It's like the 25th anniversary of the show premiering, and I still love it. I'm still watching it every week. Like, I don't have a DVR, so I have to watch them on Hulu because my kids won't watch it. But this week I watched half of the episode at 7 in the morning because Hulu puts them up in the middle of the night. Paused it, went to work, came home and watched the rest because I couldn't wait a full day to see it. And I just needed the right gate to open for me to get in there, and not every property gives you that, and not every property lets you know. Comics are probably the one place where they say, this is your jump on point.
Right.
You know, this is your new number one, this is your new story arc, because they know how hard it can be to open a book and it's in the middle of a story and you just go, well, I'm not with this character, I haven't followed this character on this journey, I'm out.
Yeah, and one thing I've noticed in my experience is that things you weren't ready for at one stage of your life, suddenly you get to a point where, for whatever reason, maturity, you had a certain experience, all of a sudden you can now get into something that you weren't into 5, 10, 20 years ago.
And how heartbreaking is it when the opposite is true?
Exactly.
Where you go back to something, you go, oh my God, this is not good.
Like Power Rangers.
Yeah, it's hard to read X-Men when you're an adult.
Right.
It's like the perfect book when you're a teenager.
When you're 13, right?
Yeah. It's like, you know what, I was listening to Nirvana, which is one of my favorite bands. And I was listening to all of his lyrics and I was like, man, another 5 years he would have gotten past it. But when I heard it when I was 19, I was like, yeah.
Bam, right between the eyes.
Yeah, some things are just right for the age you are or the time they were produced, and they don't grow with you.
Don't go anywhere. Right?
Yeah. But, yeah, this has been great. We're wrapping up now. We're at 3 o'clock. I want to thank Lyon Con for having us.
Yes.
I want to thank Initiative Coffee for giving us coffee. I want to thank LT for letting everyone hang out here. If you want to listen to this recording of the show and hear yourself talking in the background, you can find Caffeinated Comics at the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. You just go to Radio Misfits. We are the first podcast in the Lifestyle tab. You can listen to any show that we've done for the last year. You can also follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Caffeinated Comics or on Twitter at Not In My Book. Joe?
I am on Twitter at ZenMasterGuy, one word.
And you can occasionally find me at Chimera's Comics at 19 South LaGrange Road in LaGrange, Illinois.
Or 20 feet away.
Or 20 feet away over there.
Thanks for having us, and have a great rest of the con.